The restaurant glowed with golden light, chandeliers scattering reflections across polished tables and crystal glasses. Waiters moved like shadows, their steps rehearsed to perfection, their faces wearing masks of polite calm. But Daniel could feel sweat prickling under his collar, the starched fabric suddenly too tight against his throat. His tray shook slightly in his grip, and though he forced a smile, he knew the tremor betrayed him. Tonight mattered more than most. For weeks he had been covering double shifts, running on little sleep, holding his life together with sheer willpower. His daughter, Lily, was everything to him, and her medical treatments drained both his wallet and his strength. The thought of missing even one bill terrified him. Losing this job wasn't an option. He reminded himself of that as he balanced the bottle of wine, rehearsing in his mind the simple motions of pouring. But no amount of repetition could quiet the storm inside him. The table he was walking toward wasn't just any table. It sat in the far corner, tucked under a halo of light, reserved for only the most important guests. Tonight, it belonged to Victoria Lane. Everyone in the city knew her name. Billionaire CEO, a titan of steel and glass who built her empire from ashes, feared in boardrooms, admired in headlines, and whispered about in envy. Her presence carried weight, and every waiter knew that serving her was both an honor and a danger. One mistake, and it wouldn't just be embarrassment. It could cost a career. Daniel had heard the stories. She dismissed assistants with a glance, reduced executives to stammering children, and rarely showed even the faintest warmth in public. If she ordered sparkling water and you brought still, you might as well hand in your apron before dessert. And now he, a single father clinging to his job like a lifeline, was carrying a bottle of Bordeaux toward her table. He told himself he would make it perfect. He would make it flawless. He had to. The music of the restaurant, soft jazz, played to soothe nerves, sounded far away as he approached. Every step seemed louder than it should have been, every heartbeat thundering in his ears. His hand gripped the bottle tightly, but the more he focused on staying steady, the less steady he became. He arrived at her table, bowing slightly, murmuring the rehearsed line about the wine's vintage and origin, his voice thinner than usual. Victoria Lane raised her eyes to him, sharp and calculating, a woman who could strip away pretense with a glance. Daniel felt pinned under that look, as if she could see not just the waiter before her, but the exhausted father behind him. He tilted the bottle. The ruby liquid streamed smoothly into the glass, the scent of dark fruit rising into the air. Relief brushed his chest. He was doing it. It was fine. But as he shifted slightly to serve the second glass, the tray on his arm wobbled just enough for balance to betray him. His wrist jerked, the bottle tilted too far, and before he could correct himself, the wine spilled forward in a sudden, merciless rush. The silence was instant. The deep red spread like fire across white silk, staining the billionaire's gown in an instant. Gasps rose from nearby tables, forks clattering as diners turned to stare. Even the music seemed to falter, the notes hanging awkwardly in the air. Daniel froze, horror locking his body in place. His throat closed, his stomach dropped, and every nightmare he'd had about failing, about losing everything, condensed into this single moment. He had done it. He had ruined everything. The stain spread across Victoria Lane's dress, the wine soaking into the fabric like an accusation. For a second that stretched into eternity, no one moved. All eyes were on her, waiting for the inevitable explosion. Some leaned forward, almost hungry for it, the way people waited for lightning after thunder. Her reputation was sharp enough to cut steel. Daniel's mind spiraled with fear. Would he be fired on the spot? Would she demand he be thrown out, humiliated, blacklisted from every fine restaurant in the city? He wanted to speak, to apologize, but the words tangled in his throat. His hands shook as he set the bottle down, nearly dropping it altogether. His heart pounded against his ribs so hard he thought it might burst. He saw his daughter's face in his mind, her smile, her fragile hope, and it only deepened his dread. This job was survival. This was all he had left. And then she looked at him. Victoria Lane lowered her eyes to the ruined silk, then back up to Daniel, her gaze calm, almost unreadable. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath, waiting for fire. But what came next was not fire at all. Her lips curved, not in anger, but in something that almost resembled amusement. The corner of her mouth lifted, and she spoke words no one in that room expected. "Finally," she said, her voice cool but tinged with something deeper. "Eh?" Spark of intrigue. Someone had the courage to make my evening less predictable. The entire room blinked, stunned. Laughter did not follow, nor anger, only silence and disbelief. Daniel stood rooted to the spot, his mind unable to process what he had just heard. He had spilled wine on one of the most powerful women in the city, and instead of fury, she smiled. At that moment, Daniel realized that the night had not ended in disaster. Something else had begun. The air in the restaurant remained charged, like the hush after a storm that never came. Daniel stood stiffly, still clutching the neck of the wine bottle as if it were a lifeline, while every pair of eyes lingered on him and the woman in the white silk dress now ruined by deep red stains. He expected her to change her mind any second, to lash out, to summon the manager with a single sharp order. But Victoria Lane did none of that. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, resting one hand elegantly on the table, and with a deliberate calmness that silenced even the whispers, she looked at him with a faint smile. "Sit," she said, motioning to the empty chair across from her. Daniel blinked. For a moment he thought he had misheard. A waiter did not sit with a guest, certainly not with her. He shook his head quickly, stammering an apology, but her gaze sharpened, and he realized this was not a suggestion. It was a command, the kind of command used to building empires and bending rooms to her will. His legs moved almost without his permission, carrying him to the chair. He sat awkwardly, aware of the stunned faces all around them. Victoria's companions at the table looked equally shocked, but she dismissed them with a casual wave of her hand. "Give us a moment," she said, and they obeyed without protest, as though it were the most natural thing in the world to abandon a billionaire CEO mid-dinner. Soon, it was only the two of them, sitting across from each other, the scent of wine still heavy between them. "Tell me your story," she said. Daniel swallowed hard. His first instinct was to apologize again, to beg forgiveness, but something in her tone stopped him. She wasn't asking for excuses. She wanted the truth. Her eyes, cold and sharp, softened ever so slightly as she waited, and for reasons he couldn't explain, he began to speak. He told her about Lily, about long nights at the hospital, the medical bills that drowned him, and the way he worked 2 jobs to make sure she had what she needed. He spoke of the exhaustion that clung to his bones, the fear that haunted him with every bill that landed in the mailbox, the constant battle between hope and despair. His voice cracked once or twice, but he kept talking, surprised by how much he wanted someone, anyone, to hear it. Victoria listened. She didn't interrupt, didn't look at her phone, didn't check her watch. For the first time in years, Daniel felt truly seen. When he finished, silence stretched between them. He was certain he had overstepped, that she would laugh or dismiss him, and the weight of embarrassment began to creep into his chest. Then she leaned forward, her elbows resting on the table. Her gaze was steady, no longer sharp but intent, as if she were calculating something far beyond the ruined fabric of her dress. "I like people who don't give up," she said finally. "Even when the world spills everything on them, they keep going. Most people collapse. You didn't." Her words struck him harder than any reprimand could have. He sat frozen, unsure how to respond. Around them, the restaurant began to breathe again, the clinking of glasses and low murmur of voices slowly returning, though many still stole glances at the strange scene unfolding in the corner. "Oh, see me tomorrow," she said, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "And I think I have an opportunity for you." Daniel's mouth went dry. "An opportunity?" he echoed, his voice barely audible. She didn't elaborate. Instead, she reached for her glass, the one he had filled before the accident, and lifted it as if nothing unusual had happened at all. Her calm was unnerving, but her words echoed in his mind, louder than the clamor of the room. He rose quickly, almost stumbling, murmured a thank you, and returned to his duties in a daze. The rest of the night passed in a blur. He served other tables, delivered dishes and poured drinks, but all the while his thoughts circled back to the woman with the ruined dress who had smiled instead of scolded, listened instead of condemned, and offered him a chance when he expected punishment. When his shift ended, he stepped out into the cool night air, the city lights blurring in his tired eyes. For the first time in months, the crushing weight on his chest felt a little lighter. He didn't know what awaited him tomorrow, or whether her words meant a job, a lifeline, or just a fleeting kindness. But he knew one thing for certain: his life had shifted. A door had opened, and he would walk through it. The next day, as he dressed in his best shirt, one of the few he owned that wasn't stained or threadbare, he felt a nervous energy building in his chest. He kissed Lily's forehead gently as she slept, whispering a promise he wasn't sure he could keep but desperately wanted to, that everything was going to be different. He arrived at the towering glass building that bore Victoria Lane's name, dwarfed by its sheer presence. His reflection in the doors looked small, almost invisible, but he straightened his shoulders and walked inside. The receptionist seemed to be expecting him. She led him through marble halls and gleaming corridors until finally he stood before a set of massive doors. They opened, and there she was, Victoria Lane, waiting, as if she had always known he would come. Her first words were simple, but they carried the weight of something far greater. "Let's talk about your future," she said, and in that moment Daniel realized that what had felt like a disaster was, in truth, the beginning of a story neither of them had seen coming.